Thank you all for coming. We're oversold. We didn't make our money. Thanks to Cameron for the extra chairs.
My pleasure.
You folks need to sit? Oh, no. Okay, wonderful. So I want to talk to you about storytelling today. I worked many years as a cinematographer, and we just talk about some developments in terms of traced in my work from visual storytelling to written storytelling to spoken oral tradition type stuff. I never really wanted to be a performer. I never wanted to be a performer at all, ever, until I discovered storytelling. I was Bob Cratchit in a play in 4th grade, and that was it for me. Memorizing lines, none of that played out for me. But about 2.5 years ago, a friend of mine had a gig playing classical guitar at the Marsh, a club in Berkeley near where we live. It was hosting a monthly storytelling night called Tell It on Tuesday. And she urged me to come along. And after she finished playing, 5 people stood up, one at a time, all about my age, and told stories. I was entranced. By that time I had been listening to The Moth, the storytelling show on NPR. For years I had written and published a memoir, which you can buy, but not here today. And I had read some of my stories at several book launches and other events, and I knew I loved reading in public. But this story event at Tell It on Tuesday felt not very familiar, except for one thing. None of the tellers were reading. They were all telling stories off the cuff in the oral tradition, no text, no notes. My first thought, surprising myself, was, I can do that. Little did I know. But first, some background. I was lucky to have a great career, hooking up with people and productions that took me all around the world, shooting film and video projects on 6 continents in about 30 countries. I shot some concerts and documentaries, but most of my work was for Silicon Valley companies, not the Freshman Fathers Research Center, but I couldn't at this point get it. In about 6, I worked for Silicon Valley high-tech companies quite a bit. In the later years, I often worked for medical technology clients. Late in the last century, the 20th, I began to write about my work and travels. In the early days, I would scribble a few pages in a fax to my family while I was on the road. And then later, I wrote extensive emails to my wife, my dear wife Susan, who's here today, and to my kids describing where I was and what I was doing. And then as an afterthought, I would often send copies to my parents and my family and a few friends. And then things changed. In the spring of 2000, I was hired to shoot a project about the spread of technology to remote areas of the world, with 3 separate trips to Costa Rica, Alaska, and India. By then, by 2000, I had my own website, and I began to post a daily journal of these 3 remarkable trips. Photos, notes, observations, and anecdotes about meeting people, filming our assignments, and the often interesting story of what was going on behind the scenes, either with our small film crew or with the folks we met along the way. This was 18 years ago, and no one called it a travel blog. In fact, that horrible word blog had not been invented yet. The other guys on my crew told their friends and families, and they all enjoyed reading about our exploits. And then, when we got to India, the crew we hired there had already read about our shoots in Costa Rica and Alaska in the previous 2 weeks. In 2000, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, how did you like Cordova, Alaska? What do you know about that? After that shoot, I began to write about more of my productions. I taught advanced cinematography and lighting to grad students at San Francisco State for 12 years, and blogged and sold some technical articles about filmmaking. But my heart has always been with the non-technical side, the playful, poignant, personal stories taking place on the other side of the camera. I assembled 18 of these pieces into my first book, this memoir, Showdown in Shinagawa, Tales of Filming from Bombay to Brazil. But now, for the last 3 years, how long have I been retired? Help me, 4 years, now, 3 years. But now, how old are we? We all said I retired when I was 68. Okay, 3 years, there we go. And I've reinvented myself as a storyteller. In the best case, the oral tradition, unlike this moment right now, with no notes and no text. Why storytelling? I'm intrigued by its universal appeal, the fact that most cultures have an oral tradition of stories handed down from mouth to ear for thousands of years of human prehistory. Long before there was a written Bible, many of those tales existed in oral form. Just to be clear, I'm defining a story as a sequential event-by-event narrative in the form of, first we went to the station, then it started to rain, so I called my mom who picked us up for dinner, and later the giant rabbit attacked us. So this includes lots of different kinds of stories, novels, Hollywood screenplays, and my uncle's account of his visit to the proctologist. Yeah. First I got in the car, then I drove, then Now, storytelling excites the brain, according to an article called The Science of Storytelling, and I hate to say this in front of all you MDs. But, and here's a quote: If we listen to a PowerPoint presentation with boring bullet points, a certain part in the brain gets activated. It hits our language processing parts where we decode words into meaning. When we're being told a story, things change dramatically. Not only are the language processing parts in our brains activated, but any other areas in our brain that we would use when experiencing the events of the story are too. If someone tells us about how delicious certain foods were, our sensory cortex lights up. If it's about motion, our motor cortex gets active. A story can put your whole brain to work. Another article in The Atlantic called The Psychological Comforts of Storytelling maintains, and this is a quote, stories can be a way for humans to feel that we have control over the world. They allow people to see patterns where there is chaos, meaning where there is randomness. Humans are inclined to see narratives where there are none because it can afford meaning to our lives, a form of existential problem solving. Stories can also inform people's emotional lives. Storytelling, especially in novels, allows people to peek into someone's conscience to see how other people think. That's the end of the quote. Now, I'm very comfortable with this medium, even though I'm terrible at memorization. I certainly do use some of the same language each time in specific spots. But as a rule, most storytellers don't memorize fixed scripts. I think of this learning process as enveloping the story, absorbing it, wrapping my head around it, and then reproducing it as needed. I use notes when I'm learning the story, but mostly just bullet points to remember the order of events. One of my storytelling teachers, who's a few years older than we all are, and has been telling since she was a little girl, never writes anything down. And she knows thousands of stories. A really, truly remarkable brain. Now, I'll give you an example. If I asked you to tell me how you found your spouse, or how you met your spouse, or found your house, you'd know how to tell that story. If I ask you tomorrow in a week, you'd tell me the same story, maybe with the wording a little bit different, or things in a little bit different order. But you know that story really well. If you ask my cousins in Atlanta about their cruise, or selling their car, or their daughter's wedding, they'll go, ooh, let me tell you that story. And then they do. We all have stories. It's verbal jazz, really. Each telling refines the tale. It never comes out the same way twice. And that gives it a genuine quality, and for me, a very special charm. Because the teller isn't reading, eye contact with the audience is an important factor. It's all about live interaction. Now, I'm no expert. I've been doing this for less than 3 years. There are books and websites and organizations all over the world that specialize in storytelling, and I've just dipped one toe in so far. But I'm here to tell you that this can be fabulous fun, often moving and transformative for both teller and listener. Storytelling is a profoundly stimulating form of creativity and an ever-changing source of live entertainment. It's also remarkably accessible in nearly every part of the world. The reason I included so many resources in the handout packet, and I hope we have a lot of people here. I made 25 copies thinking we'd have 12 people here. So but there will be links at the end because I'm going to post the packet on my work website. Please note that the list of resources in the packet is just partial. It's not meant to be exhaustive. So I have storytelling organizations in a number of different states and countries, but that's not meant to be limiting. Just use the Google. Now, of course, the variety of stories to tell is endless. I love personal and travel stories, but I embrace the broad range of possibilities, including historical, folk, and traditional stories. The tellers I saw that night at Tell It on Tuesday all came from Stage Bridge, a senior performance theater company in Oakland. Now, you know, senior scares me off too. But Stagebridge offers classes in storytelling. Last October, exactly 2 years after I witnessed my first telling at the Marsh in Berkeley, I was on the bill at Tell It on Tuesday as one of Stagebridge's tellers. Now, I recently finished a program at Stagebridge called EPIC. I can't even tell you what EPIC stands for. A 2-year course of study in storytelling, which includes classes in performance techniques and storytelling in a variety of genres. The final course was about intergenerational storytelling, or in other words, telling stories to kids, which terrified me. We don't have grandchildren yet, right? Yeah. And I hadn't had much to do with kids since our 30-year-olds were babies. Yesterday was the graduation for the program, but I decided to come here instead. For my final project, which is what this is about, for my final project in the program this April, I produced and performed a one-man solo storytelling show at a small club in Berkeley. I challenged and amazed myself by telling 8 stories in all. People in my class said, "What? What are you doing?" Including a couple of folk tales and a historical piece about FDR. The rest were about family and travel, and only one was based on a printed story in my book. Links to videos of my solo show are also in the packet, and they'll also be appearing on the screen here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you 4 video clips, 4 very short clips of my work, all from different parts of the world. And then after each clip, I'm going to present one of the stories from my book. The first 2 I'm going to read, so we'll go from visual to written. And the second 2 I'm going to tell, even though they're based on written. You'll get the idea.
I think that the design of the iPod turned into a really personal project.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this thing out. And I ain't no rocket scientist, let me tell you.
Apple is introducing iPhoto, and I'm introducing Sarah. They're both new little babies.
Oh, how gorgeous is that? I want one immediately. I won't leave without one.
This little machine I'm looking at is the home base of a media factory.
This is what you live life for.
Technology has been at the very, very heart of rock and roll. Going back to Jimi Hendrix, stepping on a fuzz box.
Technology we kind of equate that with science, or it doesn't have to be cold and ugly. It can be something beautiful and just magnificent and wondrous.
Concern for artists, a concern for protection, a concern for evolution, a concern for people getting music right away, so everyone's being taken into account.
What's great is that I get to keep this, right? I can keep it. What do you mean, no?
Hi, I'm Steve Jobs, and I'm here at Tyson's Corner Mall in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., and I'm standing in front of this wood barricade we built in front of our first retail store that's going to open in 6 days. Now, nobody's seen inside here yet, and I'd like to take you inside for a secret little private tour, so come on in. Now, this is our store, and the store is divided into 4 parts. The first quarter of the store has our home section with great home and education products, and our pro section with all our great pro products. And every product we make is in this first 25% of the store. You can see the whole product line. And as you see up on the ceiling, we've even labeled the sections. Home, music, kids, genius on this side, and pro, movie, photos, and etc. on this side. So the first 25% shows you our entire product line.
Now, apologies for the blurry and out-of-sync video. I did dozens of projects for Apple and hundreds of projects for high-tech companies, and didn't save master tapes for everything. And years later, when I went back, enough excuses, you get the idea. For me, the experience of shooting things is what this book is about. So here's what you see is kindly Uncle Stevie up on screen. This piece is called, and each piece in the book is a separate story. And my graphic designer took a bunch of pictures for each one and designed travel postcards at the beginning of each chapter, which did a really wonderful job. This is called, I'm just going to read you a short part of this. Steve Jobs consuming the apples. May 2001, the director introduced me. This is Bill. He'll follow you wherever you go. The host nodded at me. No rehearsal, no fixed plan, just stay with him, shoot whatever he says, and always try to show where we were. I slung the Sony HD camera onto my shoulder and we rolled tape. He stood in a pool of light in front of a black wall, smiled and spoke to the camera. Hi, I'm Steve Jobs, and I'm here at Tyson's Corner Mall in Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. He opened a door in the black wall and I followed him into the first Apple store. A week before its opening, gleaming like a bright new jewel, with iMacs, PowerMacs, titanium PowerBooks, iBooks, and no one but the two of us and the sound recorders. A huge photo of John and Yoko was visible at the far end. Steve beamed a proud welcome to the audience. Now this is our store. The store is divided into 4 parts. Then, pointing broadly to his left, the first quarter of the store has our home section with great home and education products. He stopped and glared at me. You're supposed to pan over when I point there. Great. There we were, barely a minute into the tour, and I'd already pissed him off. I discussed what to do about pointing with the director, and we had agreed that I would keep the camera on Steve. Later in the day, after Steve left, we would shoot cutaway shots of the home area and the pro section and all the other places he pointed. It was a long, awkward moment. Then, the director came out of the back room where he and the Apple people were monitoring my camera and the audio. I asked him to stay on you, Steve. We'll shoot cutaways later. He should pan over when I point. So we started again, and I followed his points each time, panning up into the lights. You saw how effective that was. and then came back to him. We did shoot cutaways later, and some were eventually used to replace my pans that followed his gestures. That's all I'm going to read for that. It goes on and on and on. Steve was a genius, but he was no filmmaker. But nevertheless, he knew exactly how we were supposed to shoot it. Let me show you one more piece here.
It's important to design products that actually meet with either human needs or human desires. Our interest in India was led by an abiding interest in shared resources. It turns out that information kiosks in India are another kind of shared access to resources that provide benefit to local people, and in this case specifically rural local people.
Yeah, we are having a rural kiosk set up here. Yeah, we are doing e-government services, and all the services are being provided to the villagers.
I have used it for tenancy rights, crop inspections, and birth and death certificates.
The people themselves don't actually touch the PC for the most part. There's a local entrepreneur who's a kiosk operator that provides the value to the community by using the PC. Previously, the person would actually have to get on a bus or find some other kind of transportation from their village, head into the main office at the district headquarters in this larger town, and so it's going to be very expensive, very time-consuming, and they may or may not get it done.
Earlier I had to go to the city, leaving my lands unattended. My time was wasted. Now in just 5 minutes, I can get these documents at my village just by walking over to the kiosk.
WiMAX wireless solutions actually offer a huge opportunity for connecting villages, not only one with another, but villages to other centers of production.
Patients like telemedicine because it saves time and money on travel, and visits for the doctor are much shorter.
It's that kind of deep, locally grown business model that isn't something we would have thought of here, and that's why it's surprising. It happened there. Given the local conditions, dusty, hot, limited power, limited telecommunications, what can we do on the PC platform that can actually accommodate those conditions such that the kiosk operator in the village can offer more services, make more money, and bring more economic growth to their village?
Yeah, this is the service which we have to provide to my people. I'm providing it, I'm really enjoying it.
If we can provide technologies that allow local people to innovate in ways that are really beneficial for them, we have something good going on.
As you can probably tell that was a project for Intel. And you know, it's all about strategies and high-tech bullshit terms and lots of marketing stuff. But the experience of doing this was very different from what ended up on the screen, particularly the ethnologist, the white guy who's telling us what to think about it, which was something that they shot separately and added later, end of excuses, but not exactly the way we wanted the film to come out. But that's what happens when you do films for clients. So this piece is called 21st Century Village, Telemedicine in Rural India. Outside, the temperature hovers near 100 degrees. The air is still and the ground seared. A smear of recently graded red clay road trails through the dun landscape of the tiny Indian village of Tiruchirappalli, as if spread there with a huge trowel by a giant. Our trucks and vans cluster near a small house by the side of the road, the only vehicles in sight. Inside, I'm sitting on the floor, a Sony HD camera cradled in my lap. I'm taking a shot of a telemedicine interface box, which accepts inputs from blood pressure, temperature, electrocardiogram, and pulse monitors, and displays them on the screen of a small computer. A 75-year-old man with white hair, bare-chested and wearing a white lungi, the traditional wraparound male skirt in southern India, sits on a cot, watching the process. He hobbled in earlier, complaining of a bad ankle and chest pains. A window on the computer screen shows the face of the man, and another displays live video of the doctor, who is a bumpy hour's drive away in Tirupattur, a small city of about 60,000. They converse in Tamil, the local language, and discuss the patient's symptoms and his vital signs on screen. Soon the doctor makes a diagnosis and prescribes medication. I should feel cooler than I do, lurking close to the concrete floor. But as I look up from my camera, I realize one end of the small room is stuffed with villagers looking on. The inevitable Indian peanut gallery has gathered, and the heat of their collective curiosity adds to the suffocating atmosphere. The operator of this internet kiosk, which is really a small, narrow room in the front of the house, is a pretty young woman named Bharati Salat in a blue sari and white scarf. She hooks EKG leads up to the patient's chest and attaches other cables to the telemedicine box. And she doesn't understand why we ask her to repeat actions for the camera. She rarely smiles. We've come to India to document a pilot government program to place similar kiosks in a few hundred villages. And by the way, when I got back to the Bay Area, I talked to friends who had been to India shooting the same pilot project for other technology companies, and everybody was trying to get in on the act. The operators of the kiosks are entrepreneurs trained for about a week in computer skills. They offer a variety of services to their communities: access to government records, English lessons, internet tutorials, and in some cases, medical consultations like this one. Bharati, who comes from a neighboring hamlet, has had a few additional hours of medical training, and her kiosk has the extra diagnostic equipment necessary for telemedicine hookups. Eventually, the Indian government would like to expand the kiosk program to more than 90,000 villages, which is why all the tech companies are trying to get a piece of the pie. Now we're in Tamil Nadu, the southernmost state in India. This village is electrified, like much of rural India, but few houses display more than a single standard fluorescent tube high up on the wall in each room. Outside Bharati's kiosk, which has an internet connection but only one computer, few people stir on the street and only an occasional bus rattles by. No private cars anywhere. Our bright blue generator truck looks out of place in time. On the west side of the village, the severe drought which has plagued Tamil Nadu for the past couple of years chokes a large freshwater pond lined with lily pads and mud. Cows, goats, and mangy dogs wander around a few grassy patches, and 3 women are finishing their laundry on the opposite side of this mud puddle. Looming over the pond, an unusual bouldery rock formation thrusts upward, a Hindu temple chiseled high up into its core in a commanding view of the village. It's eerily quiet. This village is small, no more than a few hundred people, with substantial houses and occasional thatched porches or outbuildings. Okay. And time out. Talk amongst yourselves. Wow.
We just start over there.
Hey, you have to move around.
I have to move around. Okay, I'll dance.
Wave your hands.
And where were we?
The Buddha statue.
Bharati, blah, 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 blah. Yes, Bharati, now wearing a dark blue sari. Okay, keep going. Now wearing a dark blue sari and bright pink scarf, poses for us outside her kiosk with her family. And her father proudly displays the degree she received for computer studies. He introduces us to two teachers from the small schoolhouse down the street. We take a break in the shade outside as our camera assistant, Virendra, changes lenses and our gaffer, lighting guy, Kamlesh, and the lighting crew set up to shoot in the school. The teachers, wearing elegant pale green and blue patterned saris, send the children out with plates of Sun Feast glucose biscuits, which we've seen advertised in ubiquitous red and orange roadside signs. A whole plate of biscuits for each of us. The kids range about 6 to 9 years old. They giggle on back to the school and soon return with big smiles and tall glasses of cold water, which we turn down with polite regret. I can practically see the local microbes swimming around as they plan havoc for my sensitive Western stomach. To our amusement, our producer, Larry, takes it upon himself to lead the children in a counting and clapping game, punctuated by much pointing and waving of arms. He loves kids and misses his 3-year-old twin girls at home. We're fascinated to watch this as the children mimic every word and gesture. And in the finale to the game, Larry, a loyal San Francisco 49ers football fan, thrusts both hands upward and yells, "Touchdown, go Niners!" The kids reach for the sky, clueless about touchdowns, but enthralled by the action. When all is ready, the students sit on the floor of the school, and I wade on my knees amongst them, video camera on my shoulder. The younger of the two teachers, leads them in a sing-song English lesson, chanting, "Roses are red, violets are blue." They perform for her and for the camera with spirit and gusto. I watch the vivacious faces and sparkling dark eyes around me and wonder, what will happen to these youngsters? I know many Indian people from the villages migrate to urban centers. Will these students live their lives here, or will some opt to move away? Don't small-town kids everywhere long to leave for the big city? A frequent theme of literature and cinema? Will this 1.5-room schoolhouse suffice for these kids? How many will move on to other schools? Since landing in India, we've driven and flown over 1,000 miles around the country. And tomorrow we'll fly back to Chennai, Madras, for our 5th hotel in 8 nights, and then home to San Francisco. A whirlwind, to be sure, and I'm trying to gain some insight into what I'm seeing. Working here with Bharati and these dedicated teachers reminds me that some villagers seek education in order to offer services to their home areas. Not everyone wants to leave. And meeting Dr. C. Sukumar, the physician on the computer screen who you just saw, who treated the old man in Bharati's kiosk, is an uplifting experience. The doctor tells us he works with several such telemedicine kiosks and never charges for these remote consultations. He appreciates that the system saves many patients from having to travel long distances to see him, often on the bus with assisting relatives. It can take several people a day or more of travel and waiting to consult a doctor for one patient's complaints. Quoting the doctor, "I still feel I have a long way to go in serving this community, notorious for superstitious beliefs, and most of my people here are illiterate. My social dream is to impart health education, screening, and free drugs for poor people. Telemedicine is an effective tool, but still a lot of motivation, cooperation, dedication, and training are required from the kiosk operator." Barefoot at dusk, we slowly climb well-worn red and white stone steps to reach the 1,500-year-old temple in the rocks above the village. Whitewashed walls and collared patterns line the lower stairwells and hallways. As I move higher, I look out pensively from porches and landings, pastel-colored shrines, statues of Hindu gods, and inscriptions carved into the natural stone walls cater a visual feast for our camera. I ask our local producer how many gods Hindus worship. Thousands, he said. And how many temples are there? Oh, many thousands, he chuckles. I lean on the railing after making my final shots of Tirukulapadi, and ponder what Dr. Sukumar has told us. Though owner-operators like Bharati must charge a few rupees for the telemedicine sessions, and currently a dollar buys over 40 rupees, the doctor proudly showed us a ledger book noting hundreds of patients he had treated for free, and many others for a song. Once he performed an appendectomy for 15 rupees. I had a lively one-sided discussion in Tamil this morning with the old man in the lungi who sought medical advice at Bharati's kiosk. His prescription will be shipped by bus and arrive in a day or two. I understood not a word of language, but easily grasped the severity of the pains in his ankle and his chest. He was grateful to speak with the doctor from so near his own home and thanked us profusely, as if we had initiated the treatment rather than simply recorded it. Not everyone wants to leave for the big city, I think, as I gaze out over the village. The red smear of road cutting through the landscape, and the odd, massive boulders strewn carelessly below us in the spreading shadow. Dr. Sukumar hailed from a different part of Tamil Nadu and came to Tirupattur to practice. The telemedicine hookup expands his reach and his ability to deliver health care. I recall the teacher's pride in their school and the beaming smile of Bharati's father as he showed off her accomplishments. Some prefer to stay and serve. Thank you. So you can see, our experience of being there was nothing like the marketing piece that came out of this. And the whole idea of the ethnologist, when we got to this village, Larry, our producer, called back to our office in San Francisco and said, we can't do this in one day. This is too precious. We need 2 days. They said, fine. And then what they did was they canceled our interview with an Indian expert who was going to tell us what to think. And they sent a crew to Portland to interview the white guy who does all that. Okay, here's one more clip.
If you did an interview with everybody that worked in our administration,
Almost everybody walks into an Oval Office and gets cotton in their mouth.
And I said, well, this can't be my office. It's obviously a mistake.
On Capitol Hill, at least, you knew when you were out of session, you were out of session. And when you had a break, you had a break. When I went to the White House, there is no break.
You're never off job. You're never not at the White House, even when you're sleeping.
People really viewed it as a once-in-a-lifetime shot, and you would have a life and sleep after.
I just felt every day that it was such a privilege to be there.
The decisions that you help frame have a power and a might and a significance that is pretty awesome at times.
And you think, oh my God, we're running the country?
There's a lot of ways to screw up.
Well, when I moved from one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to the other end and occupied the Oval Office, my perspective changed significantly.
What is the problem is if you tell the president something that is very contrary to his opinions and very contrary to what he'd like to hear.
And so if you take a chance and fail, there's no doubt there's a deleterious effect on your popularity. Whereas if you take a chance and succeed, it's very good. There's always a danger you have to take.
There's room up on Mount Rushmore for one more face. If you do well, you might get there.
and I must tell you, the day I walked out of the White House, I was more idealistic than the day I walked in.
So this is a story that appears in the book. Years after this happened, I went back and reviewed footage and records and photos and wrote this up. It's called Dog Years, Pop Sophie in the West Wing. And I'm not going to read it, I'm going to tell you the story. I call Mom as my film crew sets up around me. I'm in Bill Clinton's office in New York. I'm sitting behind his desk. We're interviewing him today for the West Wing documentary. It's not about politics. We're talking to people about the culture of working in the White House and what that's like. I want to sit in his chair behind his desk, but I'm afraid that the touch of my tush on his leather seat is going to bring Secret Service agents with Uzis screaming into the room to arrest me. Taking up some kind of groupie. So Finally, I said, I'm sitting at his desk. I'm in his chair. Yes. There's a chair. Tell Pop where I called you from. And tell him I'll see you both tomorrow. A few weeks earlier, our pooch, Sophie, our family dog, was in a really bad way. The end was near. Her systems were breaking down. 13 is a lot of dog years. She could barely get up from her bed, and when she did, she messed herself, and she was so embarrassed that she staggered out the back door and down 4 stairs to the backyard. And I watched in horror as she slithered under the deck into the mud, because I knew that there was a hatch leading to the crawl space under our house that was open. And I dove into the mud, and I grabbed our 90-pound mutt by the rear legs, and I pulled her as gently as I could to keep her from going in there. I was afraid she was going to go into the house and die. When I let go of her to close the hatch, she slithered away from me, and I couldn't reach her anymore. I went back inside, and eventually she came back in. The next day, around the middle of the day, I went to check on her. She lay on her bed completely motionless. The light gone from her eyes. I sobbed as I compulsively washed her food and water bowls. And at that moment, the grandfather clock in our living room, the clock that my father had built for us, struck 12. Now my dad was helpless in a bed in Phoenix after a massive stroke, and Sophie was dead. Bill Clinton tells us that he ended his 8 years in office more optimistic than he started. He also tells us that both he and his political advisor, James Carville, were eligible to run for president of France. Apparently, under French law, they could, because Carville's from Louisiana and Clinton from Arkansas, both parts of the Louisiana Purchase. They could legally move to France and run for office. I don't think I'll do that, though, says Clinton. I'm sure I'd take a lot of flack for my French accent. Now, after the shoot, Clinton hung around to chat. And I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to make a connection because I knew his family had lost their dog just a few weeks before, too. Their dog, Buddy, was killed by a car. And I wondered if they were grieving the same way our family was. But the woman who had catered our shoot had a lot to say to Clinton about George W. Bush. And I just couldn't get a word in edgewise. The next day I go to visit Pop in Phoenix. Now my dad had always been a Renaissance man. An accomplished photographer, artist, musician, teacher, author of over 30 books on crafts and hobbies in the outdoors. Great influence on me in terms of writing and photography. Kind of guy who could fix or do or repair anything. But now, nearly 90, about the same number of dog years as Sophie, the man who could do everything lay helpless in a bed, barely able to move, fed by a tube, incontinent, his hearing and eyesight impaired. I tell him about the West Wing shoot. Yeah, we interviewed Bill Clinton in New York, and we're going to interview Gerald Ford in Palm Springs next week. He looks at me, and with a twinkle in his eye, despite everything he'd been through, he says, "Ford, huh? You know, they named a theater after him." I think for a minute. You mean Ford's Theater where Lincoln was shot? He says, yeah. I'm happy that I'd gotten his silly joke. Dear President Clinton, I met you last week. I was the cameraman, the tall guy behind the director during the interview you did for the West Wing in your office. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting you on that project, as well as Presidents Carter and Ford and Secretary Kissinger. I'm writing to offer my condolences on the death of your dog, Buddy. My family recently went through the same kind of loss. Our pooch, Sophie, died in March at age 13, and the house feels very empty without her. She was big and black, a boxer lab mix, scary looking but meek as a lamb, and great with kids. My wife and I always walked Sophie to school with our 2 sons. Children we didn't know would come up to us on the street, greet Sophie by name, and exchange a scratch behind the ears for a wet down. She had a prodigious tongue and a thick whip-like tail. Together they made for an intense licking and wagging experience, especially when she was happy, which was most of the time. We scattered Sophie's ashes at sunset at the dog park on San Francisco Bay, where she spent many happy hours. Then we spent the evening digging through old photos and movies of our family growing up with her. Laughing and spending time together helped our family heal the hurt of losing her. That's what I wish I had told you at the time we met. I hope you're able to have some peace about losing Buddy. Remember the good times and the wonderful, unconditional love that only dogs and precious few humans practice regularly. If you do run for President of France, I wish you the best of luck. You can always work on your French accent. Best wishes, Bill Zarchy. Now, 2 days before the West Wing documentary aired on NBC, a huge career boost for me, getting to shoot a primetime network documentary. Very unusual for someone from the Bay Area. Most of that stuff comes out of LA and New York. 2 days before the show aired, Pop died in Phoenix. I was disappointed, grieved him tremendously. I was disappointed that he didn't get to see the show, but I was happy that I'd gotten the chance to tell him about it. I watched the show with my wife and kids and a couple of close friends, and I burst into tears when I saw my credit near the beginning, director of photography, over a beautiful aerial shot of the White House that I didn't shoot. Four and a half months later, I got a letter in the mail. Presidential seal, William Jefferson Clinton. Dear Bill, thank you for the kind letter you sent to me after the filming of the West Wing documentary. I was so touched by it and regret that I was unable to respond sooner. I was sorry to learn about the loss of your dog, Sophie. While our family has a new puppy now, I still miss Buddy very much. He will always hold a special place in my heart, which, as a fellow dog lover, I know you understand. It was a great pleasure for me to participate in the West Wing special episode, and I'm grateful for all you did to make it such a success. I'm glad you took the time to write and send you my best wishes. Sincerely, Bill Clinton. So much had happened since that time that we interviewed Clinton in his office in New York. The West Wing documentary won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Special Class Program, defeating an episode of Survivor and an I Love Lucy special. For myself, in a very profound way, I started to reevaluate who I am and my place in the world. I'd always been very single-minded about my career as a cameraman, and yet I was taking inspiration from my father and trying to diversify my activities and interests. New opportunities were opening up for me in teaching and writing. A friend of mine who recently lost his father said, "You know, Bill, I find more of my dad and myself every day. So in a way, you have more of your father to look forward to, rather than less."
Wow.
And a cousin of mine who hadn't seen my parents since we were kids saw a picture of me with my family and said, "Billy, you look just like the way I remember your father from years ago." So apparently I have more of my father to look like as well. Now, Pop and I were close, but we lived in different parts of the country and we only talked every couple of weeks. Sophie was my pal, my constant companion, our family roommate. She gave unconditional love at the drop of a hat and only expected affection and kibble in return. 16 years have now passed since the emotional roller coaster of losing my dog and my dad during the career high point. Like the Clintons, we got a new puppy a few months later, a timid, neurotic rescue mutt named Montana. But we lavish her with unconditional love and affection, and in that way, we're able to keep Sophie in our hearts. Thank you. Thanks so much. That's a hard one. Okay, one more clip.
We've incorporated the Philips portal into our PAC system. We now have the ability to use portal on all patients at all workstations.
就是由原来我们的单一的 CT 诊断、单一的超声诊断、单一的成人诊断、单一的PET诊断， 变成多种影像融合的一个诊断。那么这大概是医学影像发展的一个未来。
感觉胸部非常剧烈的疼痛吧，完了之后我就到医院就医了。
ICT 呢，帮助我们发现了大量的不典型的冠心病的患者。
当然，随着我们设备越来越发展，可能对于医生来讲，能够更多的、更清晰的看到更好的图像。这对于每一个患者来讲，不要忘记，在所有的检查过程中都不能够给患者带来伤害。
Hybrid PET MR opens a new scope of new possibilities for us to develop new ways of investigating and diagnosing diseases like cancer.
We're not just looking at pictures anymore. Now we're looking at parametric images, whether it's in the brain where we're trying to define whether there's...
Okay, I'm going to stop. Oh, go back. I'm going to stop it there. Okay, did you catch that? This is just an excerpt of a longer piece. I did a lot of work in the latter years of my career for Philips Medical Systems. We always called them PMS. Philips sent us all over the world to shoot patient-centric films and device-centric films. And there's exactly 60, here we are in the middle of an English language medical film, and it suddenly is in Chinese, and nicely subtitled, well translated. But it was very important to PMS to get Dr. Guo on camera because of the global spread and so on. So let me tell you how that happened. I did a lot of this for 40 years and traveled often with a lot of the same people. And you'd think that things would get easier after a while, but that wasn't always the case. Four of us were hired by a Bay Area-based production company to work for PMS and to go to Shenyang, China, in the northeast corner of the country, the area formerly known as Manchuria, to film a prominent radiologist, Dr. Guo, basically endorsing their products, which was fine. We've done lots and lots of stuff like this. So the four of us who were traveling presented ourselves to the China visa office at the consulate in San Francisco. And two of us had been to China 9 months before for the same company but a different part of China. All of us very experienced travelers. And we had our pins in a row, we had all of our documentation. We dealt with a visa clerk who was behind a glass partition in a hallway. We handed our documents through a little slot, and she spoke to us through a speaker. It was kind of like being in a very secure bank. And she took each of our documents wearing rubber surgical gloves, and she would examine them, and then go to the back of the office and show what we were giving her. We had our passports with our previous China visas, which were one-time only, so we couldn't use them. We had our passports, we had our visa applications, we had our list of equipment because we wanted to bring our video and audio equipment in. We had letter of invitation from the prominent radiologist, a letter of invitation from our clients. So we were organized. We've done this before. And each document she would take to the back and she'd talk to people we assumed were her superiors, and they would look at stuff and shake their heads and pointing and shaking and pointing, and we didn't know what they were saying, but shaking heads and pointing at your documents is not a good sign. And eventually, we went through everything, and eventually she came to us and she said, okay, what we need is a letter of invitation from the hospital itself, from the facility. We had one from the doctor, we had one from PMS, but we needed one from the hospital. Okay, now, you have to understand that, so we went back, and a couple of days later we returned with the right documentation, and we got our visas. What we were trying to get were business visas. We'd all been to China before, almost all of us had been to China before, and the advice we'd always gotten was, get business visas. Don't get journalist visas, because if you come into China as a journalist, they'll be suspicious of you. They will follow you around, and they will restrict what you can shoot, because they're afraid of outside journalists showing unflattering aspects of Chinese society. So we got our business visas, finally. And we flew to Beijing thinking our problems were over. But that's where official China started to bite us in the butt. A very young man in a very fancy military uniform with a big hat and braid stopped. I mean, he didn't put his hand out, but he's looking at our paperwork, and he's pointing and shaking his head and pointing and shaking his head, and we knew something was up. But unlike the visa clerk, he didn't speak English, and unfortunately we didn't speak Chinese. But we've done this before. And just like every country that we went to, we had hired a local producer, a wonderful man named Andrew Leung, who we'd worked with before in Hong Kong and Singapore and Shanghai and Tokyo. Very capable guy. And Andrew somehow snuck into the customs arrival area because we had to take our 13 cases of equipment and personal stuff off the carousel, clear customs, and then recheck it for our, like an hour-and-a-half flight to Shenyang, again, in the northeastern corner of the country. So Andrew came and he said, "What's going on? You have a problem?" And I said, "Well, we don't know. You know, the guy is pointing and shaking." And Andrew said, "Let me take care of it." And he goes and he talks to the guy, and the guy's pointing and shaking his head, and Andrew's trying to chat him up, and then Andrew comes back and he says, "Okay, this guy says the problem is you have business visas. Business visas," he says, "only good for business meetings, not for video shoot. He says you need journalist visas." I said, "Andrew, that's crazy. You know, you've always advised us. Don't get." He said, I know. I'll take care of it." "How are you going to take? I'll take care of it." So he goes and talks to the guy again. And the guy stops pointing and he starts shaking and they chat. And then Andrew smiles and the guy smiles and then they, you know, no, there was no shaking of hands, but you know, it was less negative. And Andrew comes back, he says, "I've taken care of it. We can go to Shenyang and you can bring all of your equipment into China." We go, "That's great. What did you do?" He said, "Oh, except for one thing. This guy wants to impound your camera body for the entire length of your stay here in China." I said, "How the hell is that going to work? We have to shoot tomorrow." He said, "But you can bring in your lenses and your monitor and your all your other stuff and your audio stuff." I said, "You know that's going to work." He says, "I know." He says, "I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." This man is a fixer. He's a professional. So we had no choice. So my engineer, Jim, who actually owned all the video and audio equipment, takes his $65,000 Panasonic 3700 high-definition video camera in its cloth carrying case. I put a flimsy luggage lock on it that I probably could have broken with my fingers. Jim really reluctantly hands it over to the customs guy in a fancy uniform. And the guy nods, and he puts it in a closet, and he locks the closet up. And he gives Jim a receipt, handwritten on shiny paper. And Jim looks at it with one of these, "What am I supposed to do with this?" looks. And Andrew says, come on, we got to make the plane." And on the way to the plane, Andrew says, "Okay, I've taken care of the problem. I just called a rental company here in Beijing, and I rented you another Panasonic 3700 camera body." "How's that going to work?" He said, "I also hired a professional camera assistant here, and he's going to go to the rental company, pick up the camera body, and hop on the midnight flight to Shenyang and meet us on the set tomorrow morning."
Wow.
Brilliant. I said, "Andrew, you were a genius." He said, I know. Now what we didn't know at that moment was that the Chinese camera would have all the setup menus in Chinese. But my engineer, Jim, is a brainiac, and it didn't faze him a lot. He doesn't speak Chinese, but he knew that, you know, fourth menu item down, click, you know, third menu item, you know. He didn't faze him in the bit. So we hop on the plane to Shenyang. An hour and a half, we get in, and Shenyang is a big, boring, industrial, gray city. And when we got there, we were all tired from travel, and we were aggravated about all the trouble we'd had in Beijing. And we checked into the hotel, and nobody wanted to go out for dinner. Everybody was hungry, nobody wanted to go out. We were all grumpy. So we said, "Okay, let's eat in the hotel." We were staying at the Kempinski Shenyang. Kempinski is a German hotel chain. And the main restaurant in the hotel was a beer hall, a German beer hall, the Polaner Brauhaus. So we looked in there, and it looked pretty nice, but our director David said, "Look guys, this is my first night in China. I'm not going to eat German food for dinner." All right. So we looked around, and on the second floor we found a place called the Golden Dragon, and we ate there, and the food was gelatinous and oversalted and not very tasty, but definitely Chinese. So we went to bed, still kind of grumpy. We got up the next day. We went to the hospital. We met with the prominent radiologist, Dr. Guo, and we shot his interview, which we hadn't expected to do in the first morning. And for lunch, Andrew took us, the four of us traveling from here, his two staff people, and we hired 4 or 5 Chinese lighting guys. And he took all of us out for a tremendous Chinese banquet. Rented a private room in a restaurant, got a table, 20 dishes. So we really had a lot of great Chinese food that day. That afternoon we did some shots at the hospital, and we went back to the hotel. And the idea of German beer sounded great. So we went to the place, and it was like, I'd been to Munich, and it was like we were back in Bavaria. It was pretty amazing. The walls were all dark brown paneling. The bar had brass trim. There was brass all over. One whole wall had Polaner beer steins personalized for a lot of the regular customers. The back of the place, the room probably would have held 300 people. In the back was Shenyang's only microbrewery. It was amazing, but it exhibited the most incredible, widespread cultural clash I'd ever seen. The staff was almost entirely Chinese, and they were wearing lederhosen, Oktoberfest costumes. The women were wearing dirndls. My goodness. But we didn't care. We ordered beer and we ordered food, and we just were so happy to relax. And we looked across the room, and there was a small stage there, and there was a band on the stage. There were 3 people up front, a guy and 2 women who were hoofing and singing, and in the back was another woman who was playing the bass and another woman on keyboards. And there must have been a drum machine, because we heard drums but we didn't see them. And there was a keyboard and a computer in one corner, which we guessed was controlling the very flashy colored stage lighting on it. And they were really pretty good. They were skillful. They were playing 80s and 90s American rock and roll and pop, of course, which is what you find everywhere you go in the world. And they were skillful. The mix was good because the drums and the bass were loud enough that it really made it, you want to tap your toe, but the vocals were mixed down, so you could still carry on a conversation. And we kind of liked them, and we tried to guess where they were from, and one of the guys said he thought they were Thai. But I'd spent a lot of time in the Philippines some years before, and my guess was that they were from there. So we watched for a while, and we were still tired and jet-lagged, and we left to go to bed. This was our second night there. And as we left, I looked back, and I saw that the band had taken a break, and they were going from table to table to greet the customers. They seemed very friendly and very nice. Now, the next day, we went back to the hospital, and we filmed another interview with Dr. Guo's main assistant, and another interview with his nurse, and we met and interviewed a patient, and we did some shots around town with the patient. And then, all of a sudden, we were done. We'd come thousands and thousands of miles, gone through a lot of aggravation to get there, and in about a day and 3/4, we fulfilled our assignment. We actually had another day planned out, but we ended up being able to leave a little sooner. And so when we got back, we wrapped all our gear and went back to the hotel. And now we were really in a mood to party. So we went back to the beer hall. And this time we sat a lot closer to the band. And we tried to order martinis, but they were really unclear on the concept. They brought us Remy Martin cognac, which has a lot of the same letters as martini, but really does not taste the same. And they said, you know, we have a European waiter here. We'll send him over because he's European and you're European. And I bristled at being called European in Asia and Africa in the past. You know, I said, I'm not from Europe. And then, of course, I realized it meant white guy. So they had a white guy on staff, and the German waiter came over, and he didn't speak any English. And I could ein bisschen Deutsch sprechen, but I didn't know the German word for vermouth, and the guy really didn't care. So we ordered beer, and we ordered salads, and we ordered sausages of whatever kind they wanted to bring us. We didn't care. And we just settled in, because we were done with our work, and we were leaving the next day. And we started to watch the band again. We were a lot closer. And when they took a break, they started to go table to table again. And they came over to us, and they greeted us, and we asked where they were from. And I was right, they were from Manila. And they said that they had been playing 2 or 3 sets a day at the Kempinski for 8.5 months, 7 days a week, in a gig that could last a year. And I wondered if, when they were back home in the Philippines and someone said, hey, you want to go abroad for a year and play music, if that had sounded really exotic, only to end up in this kind of boring industrial city where there wasn't very much to do. And they asked where we were from, and we said, tell them San Francisco. Excuse me. And they oohed and they ahed because they knew it was a beautiful place. And one of the women said, you know, when we go back up, we'll dedicate a song to you. Because we know you must be homesick. Now, we just left home on Sunday. We got to go back. But they'd been gone for 8.5 months, and I thought, they're the ones who were homesick, but all right, fine. And when they went back up on stage, they waved at us and they winked, and I began to wonder, what San Francisco song would they dedicate? What would they know? I said, I thought, would they even know that Otis Redding was sitting on the dock of the bay in San Francisco? I mean, I could hear Eric Clapton's sweet licks. I got the blues for my baby on down in San Francisco Bay. Hey, hey, hey. Maybe not. I could see Clark Gable and Jeanette MacDonald marching across the screen after the 1906 earthquake, singing, San Francisco, open your golden gate. Or maybe it was that song by Eric Burdon and the Animals from the 60s. Walls move, minds do too. On a warm San Francisco night. And then I knew. I knew what song it had to be. It had to be everyone's favorite Northern California anthem, as usually sung by an Italian-American from Astoria, Queens. The song that my beloved Giants play after every home victory. I left my heart in San Francisco, high on a hill, it calls to be where little cable cars go climb halfway to the stars. I mean, that had to be it, right?
Yeah.
Wrong! Which is how it happened that a Filipino band in a German hotel, in a Bavarian beer hall in Shenyang, China, in the northeast corner of in the area formerly known as Manchuria, dedicated a song to their new BFFs from San Francisco, one of whom was actually born in Bombay, and one of whom was actually born in Brooklyn. A familiar toe-tapping rhythm rang out. First the bass, then the drum, then one guitar, then the other, and then fine, highly spirited Leonard Skinner redneck rock harmonies. Sweet home Alabama, where the skies are blue. Sweet home Alabama, Lord, I'm coming home to you. A for effort, but D for geography. Thank you. If you're interested in seeing that my one-man show, I don't know why, but these are the links, and this is also in your package. The resources from this talk will be on my site as soon as I fix my site, which will probably be sometime next week. And this is how to get hold of me. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. We have a few minutes left if you have questions. If anyone wants to stay, or you can come up and chat.
See you later.
So you were taping him?
No. Not the tape.
We're going to check.
I think it's wine tasting, guys.
Very tasty.
Well, I didn't put that wine tasting. Wait, it's what? Where are you from? that fun or what? There's a wine tasting and then sign up for the wine. You have to sign up for it. Dynamic tension. My wife and I are going to go to so it's just back here in the class 10. Can you get over the other way? No, I think this is it. Yeah, I think this is it. Right, exactly.
So have you been? The last time I saw you were retired. That was a long time ago. I've been retired.
Yeah, we actually had retired last 45th we had.
It was 40 and 45.
Well, Harry, it's
been a while.
Yeah, well, yeah. So this is my friend from junior high, Larry Hitchie, Barbara's name.
Oh, wow.
Did you recognize him?
I saw your name tag. You always look for the name tag.
No, you have to. You really have to.
We have no choice.
Charles didn't want to put his on, and I said, you really have to. It's not fair.
High school picture, and and some people you can tell, but some people
I actually went to one of the high school reunions 5 or 10 years ago.
You didn't go?
Right, yeah.
What?
I just...
You just went anyway?
Jane, my wife Jane, she grew up in Texas.
She did? Really? So you...
I wasn't yelling at you.
She's way up in the
Sort of I was.
Okay, so you've known... Have you known her since?
No, we met on the commuter rail in 1982.
How did that connection ever get made? I don't
We live in Delaware still.
Dear friend that my parents were in.
Yeah.
Yeah, she said, oh, one of us.
Right.
Yeah,
they went to Wheaton. Yeah.
Oh, they both went to Wheaton.
Well, she went to Colby Junior first and then transferred to Wheaton. Yeah.
And we went to Coolidge.
Right. Stayed at the Boulder Rock. There was a shop.
So they were friends in
So
high
you
school.
were part of that's so lovely.
I was in Norris High freshman year, and then I went to
this
Governor.
year, this winter was the first time we haven't gone in 37 years.
It's like Beaver College.
We decided it was time to give it a miss. We have a grandson, and so that, you know, was a much bigger draw in California, 45 minutes away from our house.
I talked to
And we do daycare on Wednesdays, now that both parents are back at work and all that.
I just didn't like the way they handled it.
I had no question. Charles had a little bit of a hard time.
It was a
his
real
identity is still more tied up with being an appalled person. But I was completely ready to give it a miss and we'll go.
But nobody's heard of
So who's that, Governor Dummer?
And I'm still
The
having a
Governor's
Girl
Academy
Scholarship
had
program
that
there.
But that was the reason I bought it, so.
Still do the calendar. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I couldn't remember where you went.
I remember talking to you, and I ordered them for a couple of years. I went last year.
Occasionally
I'm not sure, but I would like to this country just to keep in touch with mom's caregivers.
I brought two of them with me, not thinking of anything specific except that the people we're staying with in line, she always buys a bunch of them away at Christmas and that. So I'll bring them tomorrow. And this year's, which is almost over, but that at least has the information and will remind you of how to do it.
Yeah, that's lovely.
That's lovely.
So where do you live in near the Roosevelt School.
I love that.
Forest Street. 1936. Actually, Jane grew up in it. Yeah, we bought it from her mother. When she was...
Because you live in the East Side.
Yeah.
And a fairly new one.
Yeah, it was built in the 50s, yeah. We were the first...
People do, of course, become like family members in something like that.
No. Was he on Corey Road? Bob Corey and Corey Road, I don't know what. He was closer to Horace Mann. Yeah. Dave Smith was around.
You can live in the
You could.
If you could afford it. I'm not sure
No house, and I'm sure it's down where you are, just out of sight.
Well, no. We live in southeastern Connecticut. Very low.
I was down the street from us, just sold for $90. I just can't conceive of spending that kind of money.
It's time to go home, yes.
Beyond that,
Well, those areas.